The order came through on a Tuesday, which was the day I usually spent in the water reclaim bay. I remember because Petra had to find me there, threading my way between the secondary filtration columns with a calibration tool in one hand and a length of pipe sealant in the other, and she had to raise her voice over the recycler hum to tell me that the compact Envoy's shuttle had docked at Bay 3. I told her to send the standard welcome packet. She told me there was no point. The Envoy already had her own documentation. Petra handed me a data chip, and I read it while the recycler hummed, and I stood there for a moment with the pipe sealant cooling in my fingers, reading the words reclassification of derelict human settlement asset and formal processing protocol and return of station infrastructure to Daven Compact Authority. Then I put the chip in my pocket and went back to the filtration column, because the seal on junction 4 was still failing, and if I left it another hour, the recycler would lose 30% throughput, and 340 people needed the water it produced. That was 11 months of practice talking. When you have been stranded long enough, you learn which problems wait and which ones don't. We had come to Cathaldevar Relay in the first week of the colony transit, aboard the Marchfield, which was a mid-tonnage colony ship with adequate shielding and a navigation array that had been certified for the Veloldavar corridor. The certification had not accounted for the debris event that struck us 4 days out from the relay. We lost the primary drive and most of the long-range communication array in the same 4-second window. The Marchfield made it to the relay on maneuvering thrusters alone, which took 11 days and required us to vent the secondary fuel reserves entirely. And when we docked at Cathaldevar, we had enough power remaining to maintain life support and not much else. I had been the Marchfield's chief survey engineer, responsible for the geological and atmospheric assessment work we were supposed to begin on the colony's destination world. That job evaporated when the debris hit. In the first week at the relay, while we were still in the shock of having survived and the grief of what we had lost, not people mercifully, but the ship's drive, the communication array, and our timeline, I started walking the relay station with a maintenance log in my hand, because I needed something to do and the station needed someone to do it. By the end of that first week, I had a comprehensive list of what was wrong with Cathaldevar Relay's infrastructure. By the end of the second week, I had started fixing the things on the list. By the end of the first month, I had an operations rotation and 11 colonists who had proven themselves capable of maintaining the systems I had documented, and we had established a reasonable framework for keeping the relay functional for however long we needed it to be. The relay station itself was not unmanned. It never had been. Cathaldevar was a neutral transit hub, 6 docking bays, a central operations ring, a lower residential tier designed for transient crews, and a Daven compact administrative office that had been staffed by a rotating 3-person team since before I was born. When we arrived, that team was Councillor Preen Daven, his 2 administrative assistants, and a total of 14 transient crew members from 4 different species, whose ships had been delayed at the relay for unrelated reasons. Councillor Preen had been polite about it. He had acknowledged the emergency, filed the appropriate distress notifications with the compact communication network, and allocated us the lower residential tier. He had been less polite about the timeline. He expected the compact to send a rescue transport within 60 days. He had said so clearly and precisely in the administrative record. That had been 11 months ago. No transport had come. The compact communication network had acknowledged our situation and informed us, through a series of increasingly formal dispatches, that the Marchfield situation was being reviewed, that the colony transport protocols were under revision, that the allocation of a rescue transport was pending budget committee approval, and that we should maintain our current status pending further instruction. Councillor Preen had died in the 7th month, a cardiac event, quiet in his sleep, and his administrative assistants had filed the appropriate notifications, and then come to me, because by that point I was the one who knew where everything was. I had been the colony's survey engineer before the debris event. I became something else after. I am not sure there is a precise title for what I became. Station administrator is close enough. The job was simpler than it sounds. Keep the water running, keep the air cycling, keep the power balanced, and make sure everyone knew where to go when something broke. In 11 months, a great deal had broken. We had fixed most of it. I finished the junction for seal and went to meet the envoy. Her name was Serith Veldevan. She was the compact's senior councillor for the Aldevar corridor, which meant she had authority over every transit hub and way station within a 12-system radius, and she had come to Keth Aldevar because no one lower in the administrative structure had been willing to deal with us directly. I learned this later. At the time, I knew only that she was tall, that her copper-gold skin caught the relays overhead lighting in a way that made her look assembled from carefully considered materials, and that she carried her documentation tablet with the precision of someone who had already decided what it would say. She met me in the operations ring. I had cleaned the pipe sealant off my hands. I had not changed my work shirt. "Administrator Holt," she said. Her compact standard was precise and without warmth, which was the register I associated with people who expected compliance. "Councillor Veldevan," I said. "Welcome to Keth Aldevar. I read the reclassification order. I'd like to talk about it if you have time." She looked at me with pale silver eyes that were accustomed to looking at things and having them become smaller. "The order is not subject to discussion at this level," she said. "The processing protocol begins in 72 hours. I will need your colony's documentation files transferred to my office by this evening." "Of course," I said. "Can I show you the station first?" She said she was familiar with Keth Aldevar's layout from the technical schematics. I told her the schematics were 11 months old and the station had changed somewhat. She looked at me again, that silver-eyed measurement and something in my face, or possibly in my voice, which was the voice of a man who had spent 11 months fixing things that the schematics said should not need fixing, made her agree. I showed her the water reclaim bay first. The original reclaim system had been designed for a transient population of 30. We were running it at 11 times that capacity, which required the secondary and tertiary filtration columns I had installed over the first 4 months, the bypass manifold that Tomasi and her engineering team had fabricated from salvaged Marchfield components, and the chemical balance protocol that our colony physician, Dr. Key, had developed in consultation with the Velsoran biologist, whose ship had been delayed at the relay since month 2. The Velsoran biologist's name was Evath, and she had come to Dr. Key in month 2 with a question about the chemical balance in the recycled water supply, and they had spent 3 days comparing notes, and at the end of those 3 days, Evath had produced a precise recalibration protocol that increased the filtration efficiency by 9% and reduced the chemical load on the secondary column bearings in a way that I had not anticipated, and that had, over the months since, extended the working life of those bearings by an amount I was grateful for every time I ran the evening cycle numbers. The system worked. It produced clean water for 340 humans, 14 transient crew members of 4 different species, and the compact administrative staff, reliably, every day. Serith Veldevan stood in the water reclaim bay and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "The original system had a rated capacity of 40, she said finally. 30, I said. "We expanded it." "With what authorization?" "With the understanding that everyone needed water," I said. She wrote something on her documentation tablet. I did not ask what it was. We went to the medical bay next. It had been the relay's emergency medical station, 2 beds, a basic diagnostic scanner, a supply cabinet. It was now an 8-bed facility with a separate isolation room, a pharmaceutical synthesis unit that Dr. Key had assembled from the Marchfield's medical stores, and a parts list he had negotiated with a Velsoran vessel captain, and a translation protocol that allowed him to treat members of 3 different alien species with a reasonable degree of confidence. He had spent the better part of 2 months developing that translation protocol, working from the compact's publicly available medical reference texts, and from direct conversation with every non-human crew member willing to talk to him, asking careful questions about physiology and pharmacology, and the things that different species found distressing about medical treatment, and writing down the answers in a journal that he then converted into a structured reference guide. The guide was used by all 3 members of his medical rotation. It was also used, increasingly, by 2 of the transient crew members who had discovered it and found it useful. Dr. Key was in the medical bay when we arrived, attending to one of the Veldavan administrative assistants who had developed a respiratory infection, which was the 3rd time this particular assistant had come to him in the past 2 months. He was a small man, Dr. Key, with careful hands and the particular calm of someone who had learned to stay steady when the people around him were not. He spoke to the administrative assistant in the assistant's own language, which he had spent 4 months learning, and the assistant's breathing eased and the assistant's posture relaxed, and Sarith watched this with an expression I could not read. "He learned Veldavan Standard," she said quietly. "Medical vocabulary primarily," I said. He said it was important to be able to explain what he was doing before he did it. She wrote something else on her tablet. We went through the residential tier, which had been reorganized from the transient crew layout into something closer to a functioning community, shared meal preparation, that included provisions adapted to 3 different dietary requirements. A common area where the children who had come with us on the Marchfield now had a schooling rotation that had expanded in month 4 to include 2 of the transient crew children whose parents had asked if they could attend, and a workshop where Tomasi's engineering team fabricated replacement components for the station's aging systems. We went to the power distribution hub, where I showed her the load balancing protocol we had developed to keep the station's aging reactor from overtaxing itself, and the secondary power routing we had installed after the original Eastern Grid section failed in month 6. We went to the communications array, which I had spent the better part of 3 months repairing using salvaged Marchfield components and a technical reference document that the delayed Velsoran vessel's navigator had lent me. The navigator's name was Corvin Velsar, and he had come to me in month 3 holding the reference document and asking if it would be useful. It had been more useful than he knew. The array was now functioning well enough to send and receive short burst transmissions across the full corridor range, which had allowed us to establish contact with 3 other human colony ships waiting in the transit queue. We had been exchanging navigational data, emergency protocols, and practical guidance on water reclaim and medical bay management for 4 months. The Tanara's engineer had told me, in a transmission, that the reclaim modifications had improved their throughput by 12%. I had told her the credit for the chemical balance improvement belonged to Evath. She had thanked Evath directly in a subsequent transmission, which had surprised Evath considerably and pleased her in a way she had been careful not to show. Sarith Veldavan did not say anything for most of the tour. She wrote things on her tablet. Her silver eyes moved across everything we showed her with the methodical attention of someone constructing an accurate record. We ended in the operations ring, where the station's central management systems were arrayed across 3 consoles that I had configured over the first 2 months and maintained since. Merritt, who had been the Marchfield's navigation officer and had become my second in the operations rotation, was at the primary console. 2 of the transient crew members, a Velkith cargo handler named Sarath and a Velsoran communications technician named Evren Velsar, who was Corvin's younger colleague and had been on the same delayed ship, were at the secondary consoles. They were running the daily system checks together, which they had been doing since month 3, when Sareth had come to me and asked if there was something useful he could do, and I had said yes and shown him how. Sareth looked at Sareth, then at Evren, then at me. The transient crew members are integrated into your operations rotation, she said. They offered, I said. We needed the help. The station needed the oversight. It seemed like the right fit. They are not under your administrative authority. No, I said, they volunteered. She wrote something on her tablet. Then she looked at the operations ring for another long moment and said she would review her documentation and speak with me in the morning. I went back to the water reclaim bay, because Junction 7 had been giving me intermittent readings for 2 days, and I wanted to check the seal before the evening cycle. She came to find me there. It was late. The station's lighting had shifted to the lower intensity night cycle, which was a custom we had imported from the Marchfield's routines, because it helped the children sleep, and because it gave a shape to the day that was useful when you were living somewhere that had not been designed for long-term habitation. I was sitting on the floor next to Junction 7 with my back against the filtration column and my calibration tool in my hand, reading the seal integrity numbers off the diagnostic panel. I heard her footsteps and did not look up immediately, because the numbers were at the edge of acceptable, and I wanted to finish the read before I lost the sequence. She waited. That surprised me. The people who carry their documentation tablets with that particular precision do not usually wait. When I finished the read and noted the numbers, I looked up. She was standing in the gap between filtration columns 2 and 3, still wearing the compact councillor's formal jacket, which was the copper dark green of Veldevan Administrative Authority, and which looked somewhat out of place in a water reclaim bay. She had taken off the formal collar attachment. Her close braided dark hair had escaped its arrangement at one temple. She looked like someone who had been sitting with a difficult document for several hours, and had come to a place where sitting any longer was not useful. Junction 7, she said. Seal is holding at 91%, I said. I'd like it at 95. I'm going to pull it tomorrow and reapply. If the seal fails, throughput drops by about 8% on the evening cycle. We compensate by running the secondary column longer, but it adds stress to the column bearing, which was already replaced once. She sat down on the floor across from me. I want to note that this was not a small thing. She was a senior compact councillor in a formal jacket, and the floor of the water reclaim bay was not a place that formal jackets generally visited. She sat down without being asked, with the careful deliberateness of a person making a decision, and she held her documentation tablet in both hands and looked at it. I have been writing my report, she said. I assumed. The reclassification order requires me to document the current status of the installation and confirm that it meets the criteria for derelict asset processing. She paused. The criteria include absent operational management, deteriorating essential systems, and no meaningful integration with compact infrastructure. I waited. Cathaldevar Relay, she said, has functioning operational management. Its essential systems are not only intact, several of them have been substantially upgraded from their original specifications. And its human colony has, in the 11 months since arrival, become functionally integrated with the station's operations, the transient crew rotations, and according to the short-burst communication logs I reviewed this evening, the broader network of colony vessels currently waiting in the Aldevar transit queue. She looked up from her tablet. Her silver eyes were not smaller making now. They were the eyes of a person trying to write an accurate record of something that had not been in her briefing documents, and finding that the record required more honesty than the briefing had prepared her to give. The reclassification criteria are not met, she said. No, I said, I didn't think they were. Administrator Holt. She set the tablet down on the floor beside her. Why did no one from your colony contact the compact administrative network with this documentation? I thought about how to answer that. We sent 23 formal status reports in the first 4 months, I said. They were acknowledged and filed. We stopped sending them when it became clear they were going in a direction that led nowhere, and spent the time on the junction seals instead. She was quiet for a moment. The recycler hummed. The Velketh cargo handler, she said. Sarath, he has been on this station for how long? 9 months. His cargo run was delayed by the same navigation restriction that held the other transient vessels. He asked me, in month 3, if there was work he could do. I think he was going to lose his mind if he spent another day with nothing useful in front of him. And the Velsoran communications technician, Evren Velsar. 8 months. She rewrote the communications array protocol from scratch when I was working on the hardware repairs. She's better at the software side than I am. I told her so. She found that difficult to believe at first, and then found it accurate, and then found it, I think the word is satisfying. Sarith looked at me for a long time. Then she picked up her tablet and wrote something. I need to understand the power distribution system, she said. The routing you described, the secondary installation after the Eastern grid failure. I reviewed the schematic you filed, but the implementation does not match any standard Veldavan specification. It's not a Veldavan specification, I said. We developed it here. I can walk you through it. Tomorrow, she said, in the morning. I'll be here at 6. She stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the bay entrance. Then she stopped. The administrative assistant, she said. Corvin. He said Dr. Key explained the treatment to him in Veldavan standard before beginning. She did not turn around. He said it was the first time a medical practitioner had done that in 12 years. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing useful to add. She left. The recycler hummed. I went back to the junction 7 numbers. The next 3 weeks were not ceremonial. The Eastern power grid had been running on the secondary routing I had installed in month 6, which worked but was not optimal. It routed power through the residential tier's auxiliary conduits, which added 15% inefficiency and put periodic stress on the conduit junctions in Section 4. The original Eastern grid failure had been caused by a capacitor cascade in the main distribution hub, and I had never had the components to repair it properly. I had compensated around it, as I had compensated around a great many things at Kethaldavar, in the particular way you compensate when you have enough understanding to find the workaround, but not enough resources to solve the underlying problem. That compensation had held for 5 months, but it was the engineering equivalent of a temporary fix that had become permanent through necessity, and Sarith Veldavan understood, after her first hour looking at my documentation, that fixing it properly would require both the Compact's component supply network and my routing schematics. Neither could do it without the other. She did not say this aloud. She simply sat down at the secondary console in the operations ring, opened the power distribution files, and said, "Walk me through the original failure sequence." I walked her through it. She was thorough. She asked questions that required me to go back to my first-month documentation and pull records I had not read in 7 months. She asked about decisions I had made at 3 in the morning with inadequate information and the specific reasons I had made them. She asked about the choices I had not made and why, and about the alternatives I had considered and rejected, and what the rejection had cost. She did not ask these questions in the tone of someone assembling a case. She asked them in the tone of someone who needed to understand the system well enough to help fix it. Evren joined us on the 2nd day, because the power routing interfaced with the communications array, and Evren knew the array better than anyone. Sareth joined us on the 3rd day because he had been doing the Section 4 conduit inspections for 2 months and had better hands-on knowledge of the junction conditions than the diagnostic panels showed. Merritt was there from the beginning, pulling records and cross-referencing schematics with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent 9 years as a navigation officer and knew how to hold a great deal of information in useful order. The operations ring became, for those 3 weeks, a working group that had not been planned or assigned. It had assembled itself around the problem of a failing power grid the same way everything else at Cathaldevar had assembled itself. Because the work was real, and the people who could do it were present, and it needed to be done. There was something I noticed, working alongside Sarith in that time, that I had not expected to notice. She was a quick study. When she did not understand something in my routing schematic, she said so directly instead of writing it down for later clarification. When Evren corrected her interpretation of the communications array integration, she thanked Evren and revised her notes without any ceremony about it. She brought component specifications from the compact supply network that I had not had access to, and I brought 11 months of applied knowledge of what the station could actually bear. And there were moments in the late evenings when we were both looking at the same schematic on the same console, and neither of us was the councillor or the administrator. We were just 2 people trying to understand a system well enough to fix it. On the 11th day, Tomasi's team began the physical installation of the replacement capacitor array in the Eastern Distribution Hub, which Sarith had authorized from Compact Supply. I was in the hub with them, doing the integration work. Sarith was there too, in work clothes borrowed from our supply stores, because the hub was not a place for a formal jacket, and she had understood that without being told. Sarith handed components and called out connector codes in a voice that had acquired, over 9 months, a particular easy rhythm. Evren monitored the diagnostic readouts on a portable panel she had configured to her own specifications, which were not the standard compact configuration and were demonstrably better. Merritt called power sequence confirmations from the operations ring through the communication link. Dr. Key was on standby in the medical bay with Corvin and Preen the Younger, the second Veldevan administrative assistant, who had begun following Dr. Key on his rounds in the past 2 weeks, and who had, by that point, started asking specific questions about the diagnostic protocols instead of just watching. The capacitor array came online at 1400 hours on the 11th day. The Eastern grid restored to full specification for the first time in 5 months. The Section 4 conduit junctions stopped carrying the stress load they had been carrying since month 6, and the efficiency numbers in the power distribution display shifted from the amber of compensated functioning to the clean green of actual functioning. Evren said something in Velsoran that my translation implant rendered as an expression of satisfaction, typically reserved for the successful resolution of a problem of significant duration. Sarith made a sound that required no translation. Tomasi said, quietly, "Good," and started putting her tools away with the particular efficiency of someone who had been packing tools away for 20 years and had the motions well rehearsed. I looked at the distribution display for a moment longer. Then I looked at Sarith Veldevan, who was standing beside the hub panel with a smear of installation compound on her formal jacket sleeve. She had retrieved the jacket from the supply store at some point in the past hour without my noticing, which was very like her, and who was also looking at the display. "It works," I said. "Yes," she said. She looked at the numbers for another moment. Then she looked at me, and her silver eyes were doing something they had not done when she arrived at Cathaldevar, which was attending to what was actually in front of them without measuring it against anything else. "Administrator Holt, I have a report to complete." "I know. I need to understand something before I complete it." She held her documentation tablet against her chest with both hands, in the posture of someone who has stopped pretending the tablet is what she is thinking about. "In 11 months, your colony has maintained and substantially upgraded the essential systems of a transit relay station. You have integrated with a transient crew population of 4 different species without formal authorization or administrative framework. You have established a functioning medical facility capable of treating 3 different alien physiologies. You have extended your operational support to a network of 3 additional colony vessels in the transit queue. You have done all of this without compact resources, without formal recognition, and without, as far as I can determine, requesting anything in return. We asked for components once, I said. In month 4, the request was acknowledged and filed. And when it wasn't fulfilled, we made the components ourselves. She was quiet for a moment. The power distribution display hummed steadily in the green. Why, she said. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because the station needed it, I said. Because the people on it, our people and the people who were already here needed it. Because if we had spent 11 months waiting for someone to tell us we were authorized to fix the water reclaim system, 340 people would have had a serious water problem in month 2, and Sareth would have had nothing to do, and Corvin's respiratory infection would not have been treated in Veldevan standard. I paused. We did not come here to be a problem to be processed. We came here because a debris event damaged our ship, and this was where we ended up. We did the work that was in front of us. She looked at me for a long time. Then she wrote something on her tablet. I need to return to the compact administrative network, she said. I will be transmitting my report from my shuttle. It will take approximately 6 days to reach the relevant council members. I expect a response within 3 weeks. All right, I said. Administrator Holt, she stopped at the hub entrance. Your Junction 7 seal, you said you wanted it at 95%. Replaced it last week, I said. It's at 97. She nodded once, then she left. The 3 weeks she had estimated became 4, because the compact council response required a secondary review and a formal documentation request, and 2 clarification transmissions, all of which she handled from her shuttle while it remained docked at Bay 3. She worked through all of it methodically, and she sent me copies of the clarifications she filed because they included technical specifications about the relay station's upgraded systems, and she wanted me to confirm the accuracy of her descriptions. I confirmed them. A few of the numbers were slightly off from my records. I sent her the corrections. She thanked me and filed the corrections. This happened 3 times. The process continued until it was complete. On the 28th day after the power grid restoration, she came to the operations ring and told me the council had responded. Merritt was at the primary console. Evren was at the secondary console. Sareth's voice came through the internal link from Section 3, where he was doing the conduit checks he had continued without prompting even after the eastern grid was fixed, because the habit was useful and the data was worth keeping. Dr. Key was in the medical bay with Preen the Younger, who had been following him long enough now that she had begun asking questions about the diagnostic protocols, with the specific vocabulary of someone starting to understand the underlying system rather than just the procedure. Sareth Veldevan stood in the operations ring with her documentation tablet and read from the official record. Pursuant to the Veldevan Compact Administrative Review of the status of Kethaldavar Relay Station, as documented in the assessment report filed by Senior Councillor Sareth Veldevan and reviewed by the full Corridor Council, the following determinations have been entered into the compact record. Merritt had stopped what she was doing at the primary console. Evren had turned from the secondary console. I stood where I had been standing, in the middle of the operations ring, with my hands at my sides. Determination 1. Kethaldavar Relay Station is formally reclassified from Transit Relay to Bonded Member Station of the Veldevan Compact, with full operational recognition and resource access effective from the date of this determination. She continued. Determination 2. The human colony currently resident at Kethaldavar Relay, operating under the administrative authority of Colony Administrator Daven Holt, is formally recognized as the primary operational management body of the station, with status equivalent to that of a chartered station crew under compact administrative law. And then Determination 3. The operational protocols developed by the human colony of Kethaldavar Relay, including but not limited to the water reclaim expansion system, the multi-species medical treatment framework, and the secondary power routing methodology, are to be submitted to the Compact Engineering Standards Body for review and potential adoption as recommended protocols for isolated relay station management. She lowered her tablet. The operations ring was quiet except for the consoles and the ambient systems, and the sound of everything still running the way it was supposed to run. Evren said something in Velsoran that my implant rendered as approximately, "The record has been set correctly." Sarath's voice came through the internal link from Section 3. I heard that. Can I stop pretending I wasn't listening? Yes, I said. Good, he said, because I've been standing very still for 4 minutes and my back hurts. Merritt laughed. She had a good laugh, she always had, and it carried in the operations ring the way a good sound carries in a space that has become familiar. Sarith Veldavan looked at me. Her silver eyes were attending without measuring. There is an addendum, she said. All right. She looked at her tablet. The addendum reads as follows, and I will note that the language is mine rather than standard administrative format and was accepted by the council on that basis. She cleared her throat. The determination recorded here reflects the accurate state of a situation that the administrative record failed to anticipate, document, or address for 11 months. The human colony of Kethaldavar Relay did not fail in their responsibilities during that period. The Compact's administrative network failed in its responsibility to them. This addendum is entered in the record because accurate records require accurate accounting, and the accounting for this situation cannot be written any other way. She put the tablet down on the console beside her. I did not say anything immediately. There is a kind of silence that has weight to it, not emptiness, but density, the particular quality of a space that has been filled with something real. The operations ring had that quality. I could hear the water reclaim bay cycling on the level below us, Junction 7 holding at 97%, everything running. Councillor Veldavan, I said. Administrator Holt. Thank you for writing it accurately. She looked at me for a moment with her silver eyes that were not measuring anything. Then she said, quietly, not the administrative tone, not the documentation tone, but the tone she had used sitting on the floor of the water reclaim bay at the end of a long day. You gave me nothing to work with but the truth. That made the report straightforward. She picked up her tablet. The Compact will be sending a formal resource transport within the next 60 days. Actual components this time. I flagged the request as priority. I'll believe it when the docking clamps engage, I said. That is a reasonable position, she said. For the first time since she had arrived at Kethaldavar, something shifted in her face that was not the expression of an official completing a task. It was small, a slight easing around the eyes, a fraction of warmth at the corner of her mouth. It was the expression of someone who has been in a place long enough that the place has become real to them, and who has found in the becoming that the place is worth being real to. She left the operations ring. I heard her footsteps going toward Bay 3, and then quieter and then not at all. Merritt said, Do you think the transport will actually come in 60 days? No, I said. What do you think? 90. I'm planning for 120 and hoping to be wrong. Classic Holt, she said, and went back to her console. Evren, without turning from the secondary console, said in careful compact standard. She had been learning it in the evenings, the same way Dr. Key had learned Veldavan medical vocabulary, because she had said one day plainly that it was useful to be able to say accurate things to people in the language they found most natural. The components will come. She will make sure of it. I thought she was probably right. I thought about Sarith Veldevan sitting on the floor of the water reclaim bay, with installation compound on her formal jacket sleeve, writing a report that could not honestly say anything other than what it said. The kind of person who sits on a reclaim bay floor to understand a problem correctly is the kind of person who follows through on what the understanding requires. I stood in the operations ring for another moment. Through the viewport, the corridor was the same it had always been. The debris field from the Marchfield's transit visible at the edge of sensor range. The distant signal lights of the 3 colony ships in the transit queue holding their patient positions. The star field beyond everything, enormous and steady and unchanged. We had not changed it. We had not asked it to be different. We had simply done what needed doing in the place where we happened to be, with the people who were there alongside us, and the record now said what the record had not said for 11 months, that we had been here, that we had done the work, that the work had been good. I went down to the water reclaim bay, because the evening cycle was starting, and I wanted to check the junction readings before the throughput ramped up. Behind me, the station hummed, the recycler and the power grid and the communications array, and all the systems we had built and repaired and maintained across 11 months. 340 people going about their evening. Sareth finishing his section check. Evren at her console, already pulling up the compact engineering standards inquiry she would inevitably have a great deal to say about. Dr. Key in the medical bay, explaining something in Veldevan standard to a woman who was learning to ask the right questions. The children in the common room, with their schooling rotation and their borrowed desks, and the small community of young people that had assembled across species lines, because children, in my experience, have a shorter path to the obvious than adults do. And the obvious was that they were all in the same place, and the place was better if they worked together. Everything still running. The Junction 7 seal held at 97%. I noted it in the log, one more entry in a record that now said the right things, and went to start the evening cycle. Behind me, the station went on. I did not go straight to the bay. I stood at the junction between the operations ring corridor and the lower level for a moment, in the station's night cycle light, and I thought about something Sareth had said to me in month 5. He had come to me in the Section 2 maintenance corridor, where I was doing the quarterly inspection of the air circulation intakes, and he had stood beside me for a while without saying anything, which was not unusual for Sareth. He was comfortable with quiet in a way I had come to appreciate. Then he had said, in his careful compact standard that had improved considerably over the months, on my cargo run, before the delay, I passed through 11 transit hubs. I did not know the name of a single station manager. I did not know whether the water recyclers were working or not. I just moved cargo and left. I had asked him what made this different. He had thought about it for a moment in his way. Here, the recycler matters to me, he had said, because I know what happens if it doesn't work. I know whose work keeps it running. I know whose name to say if it fails. He had been quiet for another moment. I think that is what a place is, not the coordinates. The names. I had written that down, later in the operations log, not because it was operationally relevant, but because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be in the record somewhere. I did not know then that the record would eventually contain a great deal more, or that the name Sareth was talking about would appear in a compact council determination filed by a senior councillor who had come to remove us, and found, instead, a place that already existed in all the ways that mattered. I went down to the water reclaim bay. The evening cycle was at the beginning of its ramp-up phase, which meant the secondary column was coming online to handle the increased load, and the diagnostic panel at Junction 7 was showing its familiar numbers. I ran through the readings in order, as I did every evening, and noted them in the log. The seal was at 97%. The bearing on the secondary column was within acceptable range. The chemical balance numbers that Evath had helped Dr. Key calibrate were holding where they should hold. Yvette had gone home 2 months ago. Her ship's navigation restriction had finally lifted. A course correction in the debris field 2 systems over had cleared the corridor she needed, and she had come to say goodbye in the medical bay, where she and Dr. Key had been working for 6 months, and Dr. Key had given her a copy of the multi-species treatment framework they had built together, bound in the closest thing we had to a proper document holder. She had held it carefully. She had said, in compact standard that was grammatically precise and slightly formal in the way of someone who had learned the language from texts rather than from conversation. I did not expect, when my ship was delayed, that the delay would be the useful part of the journey. Dr. Key had said, "Come back if you're ever through the corridor again." She had said she would, and I thought she meant it, and I thought she might actually do it, because people who say things carefully usually mean them and usually follow through. Her calibration protocol was still in the system. It would continue to be in the system for as long as the recycler ran. Sareth had been right about the names, but the work outlasted the names, too. It persisted in the record and in the calibrated chemistry of the water supply, and in Preen the Younger's questions to Dr. Key, and in the children's schooling rotation. All of it had accumulated the way things accumulate when people are in a place long enough to understand what it needs and to care about meeting that need. In month 8, the schooling rotation had expanded for the 3rd time. The original rotation had been for the Marchfield's children, 16 of them, ranging from 5 years to 14, and our 2 teachers who had been prepared for a colony world curriculum and had adapted what they could to the relay station's circumstances. In month 4, 3 of the transient crew members' children had joined, with their parents' permission, and a significant amount of discussion about what curriculum language to use and what to do about the fact that the children were learning in different first languages. The teachers had solved this by making the children teach each other, in pairs and small groups, and what had emerged from that was something none of us had planned. A kind of daily translation practice that had made all the children, human and alien alike, more comfortable with the idea that communication required effort, and that the effort was worth making. By month 8, 2 of the older Marchfield children were serving as informal interpreters in the common room during meal hours, not because anyone had asked them to, but because they were good at it, and it made the meals work better. One of them, a 14-year-old named Asha who had the patience of someone twice her age, and the particular talent for languages that some people simply have, had taken it upon herself to compile a basic vocabulary guide for the common room setting. Useful phrases, food terms, directional language, the kind of thing that let people navigate the shared space without misunderstanding. She had printed 6 copies and left them at the common room tables. Sareth Veldevan had found one of those copies on her 3rd day at the station, left on a table in the common room during the morning meal. She had picked it up and looked at it for a long time, turning the pages with the same methodical attention she brought to her documentation tablet. She had asked Merritt, who had been nearby, who had made it. Merritt had told her. Later that day, Sareth had found Asha in the corridor outside the common room and thanked her directly, which had made Asha look surprised, and then composed, and then carefully pleased in the way of a 14-year-old who has decided not to show how much a thing means. Sareth had asked Asha how many languages she could currently work in. Asha had said 4, with a 5th coming along slowly. Sareth had told her that the Compact Administrative Service had a standing scholarship program for multilingual candidates from member station families. Asha had asked what a member station was. Sareth had said, "What this station is about to become, if my report is accurate." She had said this, I was told later, 2 days before she sat on the floor of the water reclaim bay, and confirmed that the reclassification criteria were not met. She had been writing the report long before she told me. I thought about that, in the bay, with the recycler humming and the junction 7 seal at 97%. The accuracy of the record was something I had come to understand differently over 11 months. When I had been a survey engineer, Accuracy meant measurements and geological data and calibrated instruments. The survey record was accurate if the numbers matched the ground. At Keth-Aldivar, I had learned that an accurate record could also be a record of what people had done, and why, of the choices made at 3 in the morning with inadequate information, of the reasons those choices had been the right ones. Sereth's addendum was accurate in that sense. It said what had happened. It named who had done the work. It did not omit the months when the compact's administrative network had not responded, and it did not soften the accounting of that absence, because an accurate record does not soften what it is a record of. She had written it that way because that was what the record required. That was, I thought, the kind of person she was. The kind who writes the report that can't honestly say anything other than what it says, even when it is harder to write than the alternative would have been. The Junction 7 seal was at 97%. The chemical balance numbers held where they should hold. 340 people had water for the morning. I finished the log entry and put my calibration tool back in its case, and I turned off the diagnostic panel's active readout mode, leaving the ambient monitoring running as it always ran. The recycler hummed steadily in the dark of the bay, doing what it was designed to do, doing it well, doing it for everyone on the station regardless of what species they were, or what ship they had arrived on, or what the administrative record had previously said about their status here. Behind me, the station went on. The corridor outside the water reclaim bay was quiet in the night cycle, but not empty. It never was entirely empty, because someone always had a reason to be somewhere at any hour, and the relay had become, over 11 months, the kind of place where people moved through its corridors with the ease of familiarity rather than the tentativeness of guests. I walked back toward the residential tier slowly, the way I did most evenings, doing the informal check that was not on any maintenance schedule, but that I had gotten into the habit of doing anyway, a hand on a panel here, an ear cocked toward a system hum there, the accumulated attentiveness of someone who has come to know a place well enough to hear it when something changes. Everything sounded the way it was supposed to sound. The eastern grid was pulling cleanly for the first time in 5 months. The air circulation was even throughout. The communications array was doing its quiet work of maintaining the short-burst links to the 3 ships in the transit queue, and through the array's ambient indicator, I could see that the Tanara's nightly status ping had already come through, green and regular, the same as every evening. 340 people going about their night. 14 transient crew members in the residential tier that had become, over time, their tier as much as ours. The children asleep under the lower intensity lighting that we had installed in month 2 because the lighting helped them sleep, and the sleep helped everything else function better. The station's record, finally, saying what the station was. I went to bed. In the morning, the Junction 7 seal was at 97%. It would be, I thought, for a long time.